as Ollie's working visa only permitted him to enter Great Britain via the Emerald Isle. They docked in a tiny fishing village, and thousands of people flocked to see them embark. Then all of the church bells started ringing out their theme tune, the Cuckoo Song. Stan and Ollie freely admitted that they both had tears streaming down their faces. The public at large still loved these two aged clowns, and it was an affection that would never die. But mortality has a way of pricking the conscience of legend. Ollie had a mild heart attack during this second tour and was ordered to return home and lose weight. His weight had been a constant worry to him all through his life. In later letters to John McBabe, official biographer of Laurel and Hardy, Lucille Hardy would relate her husband's self-loathing for his ample girth and his surprise that his wife would be able to love such a person. Around the time that Stan and Ollie returned to America, there was an increasing popularity building for them in the younger generation, as their earlier films were shown again and again on the relatively new medium of television. Small children in particular loved them. Hal Roach, the original employer of these two comedians, had seen firsthand the impact of his creations on the general public. He thought their appeal lay in their characters, which were simple, childlike and innocent. It's said that the best visual comedians imitate children, and nobody could do this as well as Laurel and Hardy, and yet still be believable. In late 1954, Stan and Ollie were taken by surprise on the perennially popular This Is Your Life show, whilst on a visit to Bernard Delfont, their friend and recent employer from England. To begin with, they look totally bewildered and very confused with what is going on as the cameras burst into Bernard Delfont's room at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Hollywood, and they are told to get to the studios at once. Being a live show, Ralph Edwards, the host, had to ad lib like mad as Stan and Ollie took their time getting to the studio.
And I said, I can go. They're here? Oh, thank goodness, because that was my last ad lib. Here they come now, our two principal subjects, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy. I think I have been told. Oh, my. This is more than a two-reeler. Here they come.
Stan disliked appearing for free on anything. His financial complications worried him greatly because of his marital mayhem in the past. He was also concerned with not being in character, worrying that the public would not accept them as themselves. The usual cavalcade of past acquaintances were trotted out before they were reunited with their wives at the very end of the programme. Hal Roach Jr., who had by now taken over the running of Hal Roach Studios from his father, was present and had noticed how popular the boys were becoming again. He offered them a contract to make 4 60-minute colour films for NBC to be shown during 1957 and 58. The series would go by the title Laurel and Hardy's Fabulous Fables, made up of many sketches and gags which Stan had never fully fleshed out for any of their movies, as well as some older music hall and pantomime routines which he'd rework. Stan, as ever, could never let go of a good joke, and many of their routines were often redone time and time again to try and create the perfect version. The whole series would have been a collection of fairy tales, and sadly, a fairy tale is all that it became. Before shooting began, Stan had a mild stroke, which put a final, the end, on their careers. He was told to take things at a slower pace. Oliver Hardy had always, because of his burgeoning size, taken life at a slower pace. However, with concerns over his heart, he decided to proceed with a crash diet that saw his weight shrink from over 20 stone to just over 10 stone. The effect this had on his appearance was shocking to anyone that knew him, but his body suffered the biggest shock and obviously couldn't deal with the sudden change of metabolism. In 1956, the very same year of his drastic diet, he suffered a stroke. A second, more serious one occurred not long afterwards. He was effectively sent home from the hospital to die. In the last few months of his life, he couldn't speak or hardly move, and Stan spent every lucid moment by his bedside. You can imagine Stan in that tortured way of his, trying to explain something complicated, whilst Ollie just lay there looking exasperated and drumming his fingers on the mattress. Ollie twiddled his tie for the very last time on the 7th of August, 1957. Oliver Hardy was cremated and his ashes interned in the Garden of Hope, the Masonic section of North Hollywood's Valhalla Memorial Park. Stan Laurel expressed terrible shock at Ollie's death, saying that he'd been like a brother to him. The pair had never argued, and Stan's only wish was that his larger-than-life friend had realised how much people truly loved him. Stan and Ida Laurel moved to the Oceana apartment hotel in Santa Monica and lived in humble seclusion. Stan had always been a modest man, and he was astounded by the amount of fan mail that poured through his door. He attempted to answer each letter personally and would spend all day at his desk in the study, ignoring his health worries. He would take breaks if there was a Laurel and Hardy movie showing on television, and continually commented on what a funny fellow Ollie was. In 1961, Stan Laurel was awarded an honorary Oscar for creative pioneering in the field of cinema comedy, and it sat in pride of place on his study desk. Knowing Stan, he probably used it as a paperweight for all the fan letters. During his last few years of contentment, he received visits from many famous comedians of the day, all wanting to pay tribute to their unofficial teacher.
Put that thing down!
Danny Kaye, Peter Sellers, Jerry Lewis and Dick Van Dyke would all regularly worship at the altar of England's Lancastrian son. Dick Van Dyke tells a tale of being desperate to meet his idol and couldn't find out from anyone in show business where he lived. He happened to flick through the telephone directory, and Stan, like any other person, was listed. It amazed Dick Van Dyke that someone he held in such awe could be so down-to-earth and ordinary. In 1965, Stan suffered a heart attack and was confined to his bed. Stan informed the nurse looking after him that he'd rather be skiing. She, surprised, asked him if he skied. He, with characteristic wit, replied that he didn't, but he'd rather ski than die.
Well, here's another nice mess you've gotten me into.
He passed away a few minutes later, joking to the last.
Is that really you? Of course.
Like Ollie before him, Stan was cremated, and his ashes were interned at the Court of Liberty, Forest Lawn Cemetery. Both Stan and Ollie's graves are visited regularly by adoring fans, and the few brief words on both their memorial plaques are very poignant indeed. Stan had lived just long enough to see the birth of a worldwide fan organisation for Laurel and Hardy, of which he was made president and helped to set up the amusing guidelines. Sons of the Desert took its name from one of their classic films, and Stan was proud that he and Ollie would be remembered.